This brief segment focuses on Ecuador. The goal of this presentation is to inform you on various aspects of that country in preparation for your upcoming investment decision. There are many aspects of a country that may be relevant to potential investment decisions, and the various languages of a country is the first of such issues. Similarities and differences in languages can have a substantial impact on a firm's ability to communicate with local customers, suppliers, and even employees. While Spanish, the dominant language of Ecuador, and Portuguese are clearly distinct languages, they both originate from the same Italo-Western subgroup of languages and share many common words and idioms. Nevertheless, there are also a considerable number of differences between the two languages. Indeed, in various aspects, the system of sounds in Portuguese is more similar to the phonologies of Catalan or French than, say, those of Spanish. Moreover, both countries are virtually unilingual. A second issue which can influence a firm's ability to conduct business in a foreign country is the dominant religion. Religion has a potentially powerful impact on people's value systems and can influence how they behave and interact with one another. In terms of religious affiliation, it would be difficult to find two more similar countries than Brazil and Ecuador. In both countries, more than 90% of the population claims an affiliation with Roman Catholicism. Nevertheless, while the religious similarities are undeniable, there are also some differences as well. Within Brazil, the proportion of people claiming the religion is very important in their lives, 77%, is the second highest in Latin America. Yet in Ecuador, the Roman Catholic has a relatively weak presence in the countryside and squatter settlements. A third factor which may influence a company's ability to conduct business in a foreign country is the level of industrial development. This not only influences the cost of labor in a country and the consumption patterns, but it also arguably shapes the attitudes, values, and behaviors of the population in general. In terms of the level of economic and industrial development, Brazil and Ecuador are very similar. This holds true whether you measure it by the prominence of the service and manufacturing sectors, the GDP per capita, or the per capita consumption of energy. However, despite these obvious similarities, there are also some substantial differences between Brazil and Ecuador. Most notably among these differences are Brazil's higher level of ownership of consumer items such as motor vehicles and televisions, both almost double. Brazil also exports many more industrialized products than Ecuador, including airplanes and automobiles. A fourth important issue is the similarities and/or differences in the educational systems of countries. Like in Brazil, in Ecuador, literacy rates are gradually rising, but only a small percentage of children in rural areas go to school. Moreover, even in the urban areas, the level of public education is normally inferior, and the middle and upper classes tend to send their children to private schools. Yet, despite the similarities, there also exist some substantial differences. A subtle example of this is that a professor in Brazil needs a doctoral degree in order to teach at the university level, while in Ecuador, only 1% of the professors actually have doctoral degrees. A fifth critical issue with respect to doing business in another country is similarities and/or differences in the legal and political systems. Both Ecuador and Brazil have systems of government which maintain a division of power and authority amongst the three branches, executive, legislative, and judicial. As is the case in Brazil, in Ecuador, the executive and legislative heads are elected by popular vote and follow a presidential system of government with pluralism, several political parties. Nevertheless, there are also important differences in politics between the two countries. Ecuador has a unicameral legislature, meaning that instead of balancing power between two bodies, the single legislative body has more power. As a result, Brazilian politics tend to be more stable. For example, in 2005, the president of Ecuador was removed from office during riots throughout the country. A sixth, but potentially more subtle issue, is similarities and/or differences in actual business practices. This can involve simple but potentially embarrassing issues, such as how to properly greet people and attitudes towards time. Brazil and Ecuador have remarkably similar business practices in many respects. In both countries, relationships are paramount. The trust between business partners is built up over multiple visits, often including eating together. Similarly, both countries also have a relaxed attitude towards time. People and relationships are considered more important than schedules. Nevertheless, Ecuador has some differences in business practices that Brazilians should be aware of. For example, using a nod for yes and shaking the head for no may not always be understood, be sure to respond verbally. Unlike Brazil, where appointment times are more flexible, appointments should be made 2 weeks in advance in Ecuador. Business dress and introductions are also more formal in Ecuador. Similarly, titles are very important and should be included on business. The seventh and final issue is the broader set of cultural values which are commonly shared by a large portion of a country's population. Countries can vary in terms of the emphasis placed on individuality versus conformity, the attitudes towards uncertainty and ambiguity, the attitudes towards authority and social inequities, and not least, attitudes towards how gender roles are allocated in society. Not surprisingly, Brazil and Ecuador have very similar cultures. Both countries are very hierarchical and respectful towards authority. Similarly, people from both countries tend to be uncomfortable with uncertainty and ambiguity. However, Ecuadorians value the group over the individual even more so than Brazilians. They also view gender roles more traditionally than in Brazil. This concludes our brief presentation on Ecuador.